Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you happen to be around the world, and welcome to another episode of the Groovy Podcast. My name is Ken Kousen. I'm podcasting or screencasting, I guess, from Marlborough, Connecticut, and this time I am joined by.
Hi, I'm Jenn Strater, and I'm one of the developer advocates for Gradle
And you are in.
in Berlin
Yeah,
today.
I needed you to say that this time because, as it turns out, my wife is at the moment in Berlin. Okay. Which is a town in Connecticut. Okay, that
Okay.
was of course called. It's spelled the same way your city is spelled, but of course in World War II they changed the pronunciation to Berlin because they didn't want the association, obviously. And they're still to this day very sensitive about it. You can't go there and say, "Oh, I'm in the Berlin town." No, 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 you're in Berlin. They'll correct you on these things. But it was
Okay.
just ironic that she happened to be going to Berlin, and I said, "Oh, I'm going to talk to somebody from Berlin at the moment." Yeah. So, all right, it was a lot of work for that gag, and probably didn't even work anyway. But good to see you.
Yeah, and you too.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate you being available. For those people who are expecting to see Baruch, my understanding is he's on his way to, is it the J Point conference? I think it is in Moscow.
That's where he is, and
Right.
then Renee is going there this week. So
Who is?
Renee Gershfith from Gradle.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know it's a big deal, and I actually got contacted about possibly going there. I mean, I don't want to sound like an invitation, but I was, they said, "Oh, are you available?" kind of thing. I've got a conflict this weekend, but I knew it was a big conference. I knew a lot of people were going, and it turned out Baruch was one of them. And hey, any excuse to get you on the podcast rather than Baruch is a good one. So, you know,
Thanks.
yeah, pink and all, or is that purple?
Yes. So it started as purple, and it is slowly fading out to this pinkish hue.
Well, I'm thinking about pink. Well, more purple, I think. I'll have to think about it. So, at any rate, welcome. I know you've been very active, but we'll get to that. You want to do that a little bit later, I guess. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Okay, then
Yeah.
let's talk about some of the news items and stuff. So there were no major releases in the Groovy ecosystem. We had a bunch of milestones, like as you mentioned, Grails 4. Point zero point zero went from milestone 1 to milestone 2, I think about a week ago.
Uh, yeah, something around there. Yeah, I mean that's exciting because we've been talking about Girls Forward for so long, and now we're finally hitting the milestones. Of course, then release candidates and such before we actually get uh, the actual release.
Yeah, and I
But
think
it's so really exciting to see it.
Oh yeah, and Graham Roche himself. I mean, he was at the Greach conference, which we have to talk about some. Unfortunately, neither of us were there, but we'll talk more about that, and then maybe we can talk to Sergio about that separately as well. Any rate, Graham was at Greach giving a big. I guess it was a second day keynote. I'm not sure exactly how it was structured, but it was a major address on the upcoming changes in Grails 4. As I recall, one of the big deals, of course, is that they're moving to Spring 5 and Spring Boot 2, and therefore everything will work under Java 11, which is good because Java 8 is end of life now and all of that, without a commercial contract. And also, this week, no, last week it was James Clee. I always pronounce it Clee. I think it's Clee and not Clay, right?
I I don't know him
Yeah.
well.
Oh, okay. James, I actually have a bit of a history with him, as it turned out, that I'll have to mention. But James did one of those OCI updates. Oh, there it is. Yes, he did an OCI webinar on the 27th of March. So that was a week ago, where he talked about it was called Introducing Grails 4 Updates and Upgrades and New Features. And I normally wouldn't mention something like that after it's already passed, but I do believe you can actually go to that link and sign up and then watch the video. So I think the video is still available. I happen to again have a conflict that day, but I'm on the list, so I do plan to look at that video. And as you mentioned, it's nice that it's happening, but of course we're still in milestone versions. It's going to be a little while. I also got the sense from tweets that I've seen from Jeff Brown, who's been at many conferences talking about this, that they may be aiming for a big announcement at GreatConf in Copenhagen. Are you going to that, by the way?
I going? I'm on the committee.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna. I was hoping that was right, but I gotten things wrong recently, and I didn't want to make the assumption.
Oh,
So that's right. So how's that going? How's GreatConf, the organization, going with that?
good. So I'm a little bit bogged down with work right now, so I'm a bit behind schedule on a few of the marketing things that I'm supposed to be doing. But we can definitely talk about that a little bit. We are uh, in registration in early bird too. So if you want to get your discounted ticket, you should do so now. I guess I also have a discount code for the
Ooh,
people who are listening if we want to share that uh, now or make them wait until later in the podcast. Let's see. And then oh, we have diversity tickets. So I did actually get it together a little earlier this year. If you would like to apply for a diversity ticket to GreatCon, the link is in the show notes,
right.
and the application will be open until April 15th at midnight UTC, so European time.
So we're recording this on April 4th, so that gives people another 10, 11 days in order to do that. So that's
Yeah.
good. I know that they've been somebody, whoever governs the GreatConf Twitter account, which is that Soren doing that?
Mostly Soren. I tweet sometimes from there, but not recently.
Well, there was a burst there where basically the Twitter account was posting another upcoming talk from GreatConf.
Yes.
And they were
Yeah.
posting that like every day or a couple times a day. Are
Once we
you
confirmed all the speakers, then we started announcing them. But we haven't been keeping up that rapid fire of tweets. We'll probably have another round of that coming soon as we start promoting. We generally tend to wait until after Greach is over, just to like
Yeah.
make sure that they have their spot, and then we actually start with promotions for Great Company.
Well, that's fair, and I don't want to minimize Greach again because I was really sad I wasn't able to go there. I was supposed to do a no fluff just stuff event in Phoenix, and then the event got canceled, and uh, I was really one of those people thinking, well, what would a flight cost just to go at the last minute kind of thing, and then I came to my senses. So, but I mean, it looks like from the tweets that came out of Greach that it was a very successful conference, and that it looked like everybody had a really good time at that one.
Yeah, I'm
So
really glad that Sergio picked that up, because it's a lot of work to organize a conference, but it seems like he did a really good job.
yeah, and we'll find out if he learned his lesson or not when it
Yeah.
comes around to next year. But again, we'll talk about him, and I imagine there will be recordings that'll come online at some point. I did notice. Oh no, they have even the slides haven't been. People haven't been posting where their slides are yet, so I imagine all that's still being organized. I mean, it was only last week anyway. So, at any rate, I just didn't want to minimize Greach. And of course, if we mentioned Greach, we mentioned Sergio Delamo, for those who don't know, who, in addition to being a major conference organizer, is now also publishes the Groovy Calamari newsletter as well as the Groovy Calamari podcast. He's going to pass us a number of podcasts very well soon, I guess. At any rate, the one thing I did put in the show notes about the Groovy Calamari podcast, they have a new homepage that he put together. I mean, most people, you get a podcast, you get it through your podcast app or whatever, or Apple or whatever you normally would do. He did put together a homepage, and the thing about that homepage, let's see if I can find it again, is that I think it's got an embedded player on it. Yeah, so you can actually hit a button and listen to it. The latest interview is with all right, I'm gonna pronounce it wrong. Well, the Vladimir part I can pronounce that. Oranyi. It's got a Y with an accent on it, so I'm not exactly sure how you're supposed to pronounce that. But you know what would help? You know how I would learn how to pronounce that? I should listen to the podcast, shouldn't I?
Yeah, I should do the same. I
Yeah.
actually, so
I
I
mean, I
didn't realize that there were new episodes because I like with Groovy podcast. I know when there's new episodes because YouTube reminds me every time we upload.
ah
Uh, but I went to do the news and like fetching the information for this podcast, and I didn't realize that I had missed like 5 episodes of the other podcast.
okay. Well, then if it's you as well, then we'll blame Sergio for not marketing well enough. But the last one I think I listened to was the one with Andre Salmire, which it turns out was episode 8. And there's
Same.
now a 9 with Pablo Martinez, and then 10 B2 Boost. I don't know that one as much. And then 11, and now 12 is the latest. So
Okay,
that
cool.
one's, again, they're all listed on that page. They're all available as recordings and everything. So that's fine. At any rate, so now we've gone way overboard in how much we needed to market for our competitor here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so any rate, this is what happens when we don't have major releases in the Groovy community. I will mention a couple of related releases, though, things that were part of the community but not directly. Although I guess before I do that, Micronaut also has a release candidate out. The 1.1.0 RC2 is now available, and I put a link in the show notes for that too. So, are you doing anything with Micronaut these days, by the way?
I am not. I always keep saying that I should. I mean, it's really awesome. I've been going to talks about Micronaut at
Mm.
all the conferences that I go to, but I haven't had something I can actually use it on yet.
Yeah, and of course it seems to be breaking through, which is kind of neat because it's been a long time since I've seen a new technology actually start to get into the popular culture and what well the common culture for us, and it seems to be happening partly because the spring people are starting to pay attention now. The spring people were getting annoyed because the Micronaut people kept saying, "Look how much faster we are at startup than yours."
It actually gets helped a bit by the Java community. So when I was at Java Land a couple weeks ago now, it was mentioned several times in a
Ah.
lot of the Java talks too. It wasn't just the groovy little niche anymore, but Micronauts breaking into the big leagues.
Yeah, and this, as I say, the spring people got kind of annoyed, and then of course Jeff and Graham both tweeted. It's like, look, that's not the issue here. It's good that everybody's talking about performance now. I'm glad that a lot of people are looking at those issues, but we really are fundamentally changing the game in certain ways. This whole compile time metaprogramming without having to do the sort of class path scanning that Spring Boot apps do on a normal basis. All of that stuff being done in compile time to improve the performance. That's they're happy that a discussion is going on. So again, typical Groovy community of looking like there might possibly be a confrontation and saying, no, 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 we're good. But hey, you might actually want to pay attention to us, and maybe they will. So that's good. I mean, it was a big deal at DevNexus too.
Right.
Yeah. So and of course Venkat Subramaniam did. Oh, I meant to put a link about that too. You know Venkat, right?
Uh, yes.
Yeah. I mean, how do you not know Venkat, right? He's probably the hardest working guy in the community. At any rate, the Oracle Groundbreakers Award, the one that Graham won last year, along with two others. Um, they have the nominations up for the new list, and they did something weird with that. I don't know if you saw that. The Oracle people are basically making people vote via Twitter for people to win that award, which I don't like at all. I don't know. You see,
I don't
yeah. I mean, that turns it into a popularity contest having to do with Twitter followers, and that's weird. Um, but at any rate, Venkat's on the list, and I voted for him. I mean, again, well, yeah. There's a list. Oh, you can. The voting started April 2nd, so the nominations were announced April 1st, which was kind of funny actually when you think about it. And then there's a link where you can go and vote for. I think that's like 6 or 7 people there, and unfortunately, the only person I actually knew, based on their contributions and everything, was Venkat. And I'd say Venkat's written a book on Groovy, and of course, most people know that. But then again, Venkat's written a book on everything, so that's not a big shock. But if you vote for him, you have to do it via tweet, and we'll see how that plays out.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually what I was going to comment. That I've noticed several of the other nominees because they're filling up my Twitter feed,
Hmm.
but I have not seen any votes for Venkat yet. So
Well, I know I did
I
one.
wasn't sure if he was nominated.
And a couple other people have as well. I have no idea. There's no indication of a score or ranking or anything like that. I also have no idea. I didn't read the rules closely enough to find out how many people can qualify. Can they all qualify? Is there only one? Is there a threshold? I have no idea. I don't get the feeling they know what they're doing either, but we'll see. Now, I don't mean I mean Oracle. I think they're just throwing something at the wall and saying, "Hey, let's see if this works," and we'll go with that. So, any rate, okay. So, boy, now I'm giving marketing to Venkat too. Is there any other competitor I want to bring up here? This sort of thing. Anyway, that was all in conjunction with the idea that Micronaut's got a release candidate out now, and oh, sorry, did you want to say something?
Oh, and the Micronaut is bringing everyone together.
Right. Yeah, it definitely seems to be making progress, and we're looking forward to that. I should, though, mention another significant one, I suppose. Gradle, of course, is on a normal 6 to 8 week release schedule that they've been on for years, which is really impressive. It scares people when I talk to them because they go, "Well, I'm still on 2.4. Is that hopelessly out of date?" It's like, no, actually, it is, but it isn't. I mean, they haven't. Most of the changes have not been in the API. They've added some things, but it's mostly under the hood. In other words, yeah, you want to upgrade, but you're not going to have to relearn the tool, kind of thing. But of course, 5.3 is out. Did you want to comment on 5.3 or 5.3.1?
Sure. I mean, so we can step back a little bit and say that yeah, the Grail team has been working really hard to keep those release cadences going, and a lot of the changes are adding new features, which is always awesome. But we do really try to make sure that everything stays backwards compatible, so that like you're talking about, people can like easier transition from older versions to newer versions. It mostly affects people who are writing the plugins more than the end users.
Right,
But
right.
I mean, there are still, like, between the major versions, there are still things that break. You'll need to upgrade versions of all your plugins and such. But yeah, I mean, we're chugging along and it's getting better and better. For 5.3,
Mm.
there's two big things that are in 5.3. So the first one is feature variants, which is, if you all the Maven users are familiar with optional dependencies, it is optional dependencies and then more. So it's much more flexible. You can specify a lot more things, and we wanted to actually go against this kind of misnomer of optional dependencies, because it's not actually about being optional, but including them in specific variations of your build. And I know that's really complicated, and it's still something that a lot of people struggle with. But the dependency management team is working really hard on trying to clarify some of that stuff. So the dependency management documentation is being updated too. We have a new blog post about feature variants and the metadata format, which I'll mention in a second. And then they just did a dependency management webinar that the video should be available now on the Gradle.com blog. I
I'll
think I'm
I'll
gonna tweet about it later in the week, but it's actually on the Gradle blog.
I'll check while you're
Uh,
talking about it. Go ahead.
okay, and then so that's like, there's a whole series now of those started. So the one that they just released is part one, and it'll get more and more into detail as they go along. The other exciting thing that's happening in dependency management right now is the Gradle module metadata format. So it's a new format, kind of like the Maven metadata or Ivy, or like just like how you define what you're actually publishing and then what goes to Maven Central, etc. And then so the dependency management team wanted to define a new format that's much more flexible than the ones that already exist. And so what's happening now is that if you turn it on in 5.3, you will also get an export in this new metadata format. And then starting in 6.0, that'll be on by default. So then everyone will get that feature. So it's kind of in testing right now. The format itself is 1.0, but the end users can try it optionally if they want.
Yeah, the blog post that, well, Cedric put up there, Cedric Champeau, on the Gradle module metadata. As it says in there, it allows you to specify. Actually, why don't you say what? How would you explain what the module metadata allows you to do?
Okay, sorry.
Is that a hard
So
question? I didn't mean to
no,
put you on the spot.
I wasn't sure if you were going to continue reading or not. It
Oh,
was just
oh,
me,
oh. Sorry.
not sure if you were going to continue or not. So the yeah, like the blog post says, goes into a bit of the use cases, into what the other formats don't cover,
Mm.
specifically like around uh, dependencies and variations of builds. We're not we're living in a world now where builds aren't as simple. Like we're not just running one simple build that runs the same thing every time. Now we have different variations and different platforms. If you're a library producer, then you have all of these different downstream services that are having to consume your library, and maybe they want different features. So it's all still pretty vague, but you should read Reach Desert's blog post a bit, and it links to some places in the documentation that they've been fleshing out, and there'll be more webinars and stuff coming on that topic.
Yeah, I think what happened was is I read the blog post when it was first announced. And by the way, please subscribe to the Gradle newsletter. The blog posts are always highlighted in the newsletter, of course, and the newsletter is like really good. And I don't just say that because I know the person who puts it together. You know, actually, it's been good for years. I've always been very impressed with the newsletter. I helped work on it for a while, and I didn't do a great job. But there are other people. I mean, when Eric took over, he did a fantastic job, and now you're in charge of that now, right?
Correct. So one of my assigned tasks is to write that newsletter, and it was a major part of my onboarding.
Mm.
It had to be up to Eric, the level that Eric had set before we could publish it.
And that was Eric again. For people who don't
Eric
know, that's
Wendland.
Eric Wendelin, right? Who is not working on that stuff anymore, right? I mean, that's all yours now, right? He moved to
Uh,
another. Didn't he move to another group or something at Gradle or whatever?
I think that's public.
He tweeted
Yeah.
it. I mean, I wouldn't know about it if he hadn't said it. Yeah, I
Uh,
no, I'm not bringing up anything that's insider information. I mean, yeah, no, I can understand the debate though. Any rate, the newsletter is at, if I remember, it's newsletter.gradle.org, something like that. Very
yeah.
simple. I think if you just go to gradle.org and you go under the about resources or whatever, it's one of those other resources. You can just click on it, and the web page, if you're curious, has like always has the latest 6 issues. So you can go in there. Any rate, so the newsletter led me to the blog post, and the blog post I read and got confused. Because
Okay.
the sorts of builds I work on don't tend to need that level of fine grained variation. But the blog post does talk about this variant aware dependency management and the module metadata and how you put together this big .module file in JSON format and can really customize what you're doing. But again, because I don't really have much of a use case for it, I wasn't really clear on exactly how to explain it or understand it. So when they do have a presentation on that, I probably will go and sit in that to find out more about it.
Yeah, I think it'll be in the later part of the series. Right now, they're still doing basics.
Now they mentioned there was a 5.3.1, but that was just a what was it, fixes some bugs for multi-project builds you said in there.
Yeah. Yeah, there were two minor bug fixes in the point release. But the first one was kind of important because it affected multi-project builds, which lots of people have multi-project builds.
Yeah.
So that went quickly out the door after 5.3 because we needed to fix that bug.
Mm. So, but you also mentioned a new logo for
Have you
the
seen it?
grumpy Gradle font is not so grumpy anymore. Is that what it is? No.
I didn't say that.
No, no, you didn't say that.
Oh,
That was my
uh,
observation from looking at it. Where's the new logo? I gotta find this. This was just on
so
Gradle.org, right?
Grail.com/brand, we have a whole kit now. So if you are a presenter, if you write blog posts, if you do trainings, and you need any of the logos, you can now download them. You don't have to ask us for them.
Look at that.
And there's a whole story about how the new logo is more symmetrical.
More
Uh,
symmetric. I didn't notice that. All I'm noticing looking at it is that it doesn't. They turn the eye around, so it doesn't look so grumpy anymore. That was my opinion.
yeah,
Again, I
yeah.
used to say the reason the Gradle font was so grumpy is he only had 3 legs.
He still has three legs.
Yeah. So, but it seems now he seems to be reasonably happy about, or she. I don't know idea. But the Gradle font looks reasonably happy about it now.
Yeah.
But I didn't know about Gradle.com/brand, so that's nice. And did they play with the colors at all? Because I see that nice blue trend now.
So The blue gradient is also new. It's an alternative. So we still have like the dark gray, and now we actually have an official white logo. So if you are doing stuff on dark backgrounds, you don't have
Ah,
to mess around with the shading and try to Photoshop it yourself. You can get both the white and the dark background, and then we have this new gradient background too, which tends to be on a lot of the Gradle Enterprise product
yeah.
branding.
Uh-huh.
And also, I have stickers now. So if you find me at a conference, I have stickers in the nice, pretty blue gradients.
Yeah, and they've got the whole list here. Wow. I see I don't spend much time on Gradle.com. I spend it on Gradle.org, because I
Everyone
mostly talk,
does.
pardon me?
Everyone does.
Yeah, but I mean that's intended, right? I mean, the Gradle.com people are going for Gradle Enterprise, which I understand. And of course, we mentioned on the podcast last time that Gradle Enterprise now helps with Maven builds, right? That it allows you to have a build cache for Maven tasks and also build scans with Maven builds, right?
Correct. So that's actually been released. So when we were talking about last time, it was still in development mode.
Oh, okay.
But as of the beginning of March, uh, the newest version of Gradle Enterprise 2019.1 includes both a remote build cache server for Maven as well as the build scan service for Maven builds. Now, if you don't have Gradle Enterprise and you just want to try it out, you can go to scans.gradle.com and hashtag Maven if you want to see the Maven specific instructions. There's also a tab there too, so don't worry about that. And so we have a free version that includes the scans, just like we do with the Gradle build scans. But to get the build cache, you'll need the enterprise license.
I see everything there that you were just describing.
That in
Yep.
essence, yeah.
Got the pictures, got a little animation and everything in there. Well, best of luck to all that. I mean, again, I don't have the use case where that comes up a lot, but I do encounter a fair number of people who certainly could use it. So I'm glad to see that. And now, of course, you can tell all the people at Gradle that you've done your I don't know obligation or whatever. You've been nice about Gradle on the podcast.
Yeah, I mean it's not just that. Like so, for example, recently I've been trying to contribute to more of the Spring projects, and so all of the Spring
Hmm.
projects, although they support users of both Gradle and Maven, their actual build itself is all in Maven. And so I've been struggling with some of these things now myself, and I really like the Maven build scans, especially for dependency stuff.
Very interesting. Okay, yeah, Spring has had a long history of preferring Maven, although I always use Gradle when I build a Spring Boot project. But I know they've got some people who do that, and I didn't realize the actual build itself for Spring was using Maven. Although I guess if I thought about it, I would have assumed that was too true.
Yeah, and all the other sub projects too.
Interesting. Okay, now the other related, if you will, project, I guess, that did do a major version is that Dan Allen, the head of the ASCII Doc project, or no, sorry, the head of the ASCII Doctor project, right, announced ASCII Doctor 2.0.0, which is been a long time coming. That's a major revision. Now, are you involved in any of that? I mean, I know you talk about it with your generation stuff a lot. Is there anything you could
Uh,
say about it?
So I'm not part of the team
Yeah,
that develops ASCII Doctor or any of that stuff,
right.
but I am definitely a fan and I use it. And so I just gave a talk on Tuesday at Micro Exchange about the way that Gradle uses ASCII Doc and ASCII Doctor, and some of the extensions that we've written and such. So, I mean, now of course we're going to have to upgrade to 2.0, but
Right.
that'll actually give us a lot of gain. So there's, like you said, 2.0 has been a long time coming, and I've been trying to keep up with it because I know I'm going to have to now update all of my side projects to use 2.0 to get all the benefits.
I mean, I write all my training materials using ASCII Doc, and I drive it with Gradle. So I care about the ASCII Doctor J plugin inside of Gradle, and the latest I've still seen on that is 2.00 release candidate 2 or whatever. I haven't seen the 2.00 version formally out, but I haven't tried it in in a week or so. Also, O'Reilly uses Gradle, or pardon me, uses ASCII Doc for their books while the pragmatic programmer uses Markdown. So you want to talk about switching back and forth? Yeah, it's really awkward. But I am looking forward to adopting the new 2.0 version. I think the biggest thing that was in 2.0, most of the stuff in there doesn't affect me at all. But there was one thing about pluggable syntax highlighters that was a big deal. And I know that I think it was the JUnit 5 people were waiting to update their documentation because you could tell the look and feel of ASCII doctor generated documentation. And JUnit 5 docs are in ASCII doc, and I think they wanted to wait for ASCII doc 2.0 so they could update the syntax highlighting and then update everything because they've always supported, what is it, pigments and code ray, but now they can do a whole bunch of different things as well. Okay, so that was good. And I suppose we should mention also, speaking of Gradle plugins, by the way, is that at Greach, didn't Andre Salmire talk about his Chordamp set of plugins as well?
He did. He did a workshop on those Cordon plugins. And actually, so they released the ASCII Doctor 2.0 plugin at Greach with Shulk and Andres both there.
Right, Skulk was doing a talk on that, wasn't he? I forgot. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, yeah, that's actually what I was going to say. That he gave a talk and it seemed really exciting. I'm sad that I missed it.
Yeah, and of course, it makes sense that Skulk was there, given that he's based in Andorra. So I have no idea how far that is from Madrid, but it's certainly a lot closer than we are, you know. But I'm glad he was able to go there. It's good to see him still active in the community as well. Oh, and by the way, I didn't put it in the show notes, but there was another talk I noticed was at Greach was one on SDK Man, the internals of SDK Man. Yeah, all I saw the slides, and of course I got lost very quickly because he gets right into the guts of SDK Man, and I'm just a user, you know. But that's also good to see that was going on, and I'm sure when again things are a bit more publicized and organized, we'll see the links for all of that too. I suppose if we're talking about build tools, I should at least mention that Gmaven Plus had a new release as well for those people that are using the Maven plugin for Groovy, I suppose. Both of those people, right? I have no idea how many people are involved in that.
No, actually, it's a fair number.
Is it?
We've been so now that we're doing both Gradle and Maven on the developer advocacy side.
Uh-huh.
When we go out and give talks at conferences, I'm a lot more conscious of the percentage of people in the audience that are using Gradle and Maven. And so I think we were saying that at Greach, even in the Groovy community, there's still a lot of people that use Maven instead of Gradle. And then at this conference that I went to this week, I had a room of like 40 people and only 2 were using Gradle.
Wow.
So that was really, really fun.
Well, the statistics do tend to suggest. I mean, all the surveys that come out. I mean, now again, the surveys are always, you wonder about the sample bias, and you wonder about the self-selection and all that sort of stuff. I mean, there's a lot there, but it does seem like the percentage of people using Maven is still 60 to 70% of the overall Java community. I don't know about Groovy, but certainly the Java community. And that seems to be stubbornly hanging on. Just it's very difficult to shake something that's that deeply entrenched. You know, and I imagine this is a source of some frustration at Gradle when you have an obviously superior tool in many ways. You know, but regardless, as you say, I shouldn't minimize the Gmaven Plus plugin then, because again, it's probably some people's avenue to getting involved in Groovy at all. Now, the other one that came out was Groovy Eclipse, which I think they had, what is it, their 3.3.0 version came out. I try to avoid Eclipse when I can. I use Eclipse when clients use Eclipse, you know, or when I have to do a demo for somebody and they're doing Eclipse. And this also comes up with Spring Tool Suite as well. The Grails support kind of was a casualty. You know, that's kind of gone. But the Groovy support, I actually met the guy, what's his name? Eric, let's see if I could find the release notes here. I know I put it in here. Eric Milles, I think Milles. Yeah, I met him actually at a No Fluff Just Stuff conference. He says, "Oh yeah, by the way, I'm the guy working on that. We got to get him on the podcast at some point too." So yeah, I mean the Groovy plugin is still a thing inside Eclipse. It's still growing. It's still active, and now it has support for Groovy 3.0 Alpha 4, but it also has support for Groovy 256. It's got the parrot parser, although you have to enable a flag. It's still optional and everything. And it works with the absolute latest version of Eclipse, the 2019-03 version. I'm still kind of disappointed they're not naming them after planets and stuff, but now it's just 2019-03. They came out with a new version last month of Eclipse, and they've got the Groovy support right inside it. Do you ever have to deal with Eclipse anymore or not?
I don't remember the last time I had to use Eclipse.
So you don't have to deal with
I
build ship either then?
No. I mean, we have people that do,
Yeah.
so Donat does, but yeah. Usually, if I can't use IntelliJ, then I try to use NetBeans
Oh,
for
really?
my ranking. Yeah,
Okay, I didn't know
really
that.
important.
Yeah, that's an interesting statement, so we'll see. Any
Yeah,
rate,
it kind of works.
yeah, sure. No, the NetBeans group, from what I understand, it's a small community, but it's a very vocal one. They don't like being overlooked. The way the Griffin people don't like being overlooked too. They didn't have a release recently that I missed, did they? Or I think we're okay there too. I think. Yeah. Well, we'll hear from Andres otherwise. Okay. What else is going on? You want to mention the business about Daniel's son?
Uh, well, yeah, I guess we can. So there's two things. So first is that it's really awesome. He got an award from Google, which you can see the link in the show notes,
Mm.
which goes to thank him for a lot of his contributions over the years with Groovy. And then the other big thing is that he's been really integral in the new Friends of Groovy Open Collective initiative. So
Right.
both of those are great for helping Dan or recognizing him.
The Friends of Apache Groovy link there, which is in the show notes, is where you can actually. I think we mentioned it at the podcast we did with Graham Roche at DebNexus. We talked about the fact that you can help put in a small amount of money, either one time or a monthly contribution, to help fund some efforts. And I think you mentioned it, and I think I heard from Eric that some of that was going toward that Eclipse Groovy support as well. Or maybe that was planned. I'm not sure which. Did you know any detail on that?
Yes, so I joined the committee.
Oh, okay. Then let me stop talking. Go ahead. You tell me
I'm
what's going on.
signing up to do more things. Right. So, yeah, I guess I had volunteered on the mailing list, and so now I am trying to help where I can. Unfortunately, I haven't had time recently, but so the biggest advancements here are that yeah. So we thank you to everyone who contributed so far. We are finally able to actually start prioritizing that. So the first request that came in was from Eric to work on Groovy Eclipse. As far as I know, we're still discussing like the details of it because this is the first one, so we don't have a good process for like what should what should be considered done and how much to distribute and stuff like that. So we're still working through a lot of those processes. But if you have particular opinions on it, you should join the Groovy Community Slack. So
Oh.
groovycommunity.com, all one word, to sign up. Or if you're already in the Slack, then just go find the link again. Um, but we have a new public channel now called Friends of Groovy, and we haven't actually like announced it yet. We were just talking about it the other day that we want to start discussions there about what people think we should work on and what we should use that money for.
Can you mention any of the other people on the committee?
Yeah, so we're all publicly listed there. So if you go to like the Open Collective website and you scroll down a bit, it's Paul and Daniel and Soren and me and Martian Erickman. So
Oh, okay. I'm just scrolling down at the moment. Oh, there's the team right there. Yeah. And
yeah, so that's all public.
so in other words, I would have known. That's got an old black and white picture of you. You really need to update that. You
Oh,
know.
with the blonde, no more purple. Yeah.
Well, it's black and white, so who can even, I suppose. But I mean, all the other people have a color picture, so you're in
Yeah,
marketing now, right? You know.
yeah, it's probably it pulled it from Gravatar or something where I still have an old logo. The rest, everything else has my like macho stance with my hands on my hips and my purple hair. But that one's still the old picture, the professional picture that I had taken.
Right. But yeah, now I see everybody on the team there, and they've got the budget and everything. So hopefully, people will be able to will be encouraged to participate in that. I've got to go add that channel on the Groovy Slack then as well. So good. I'm glad you brought that up, and that also took care of the. I think it was Guillaume Laforge at Google that put Daniel up for the award,
Yeah,
and
that's
it
right.
went through, and that was congratulations to Daniel. That's wonderful. I mean, he's doing an enormous amount of work. I know he was one of the people behind the heart of the parrot parser. He did a lot with that, but I know he's made contributions throughout the core. Couple other things. Did you want to say anything about Java Land, by the way?
I did. I was there. I ran into lots of groovy people. It was really nice to connect. And I was actually really surprised because even in this big Java conference, there were lots of mentions of Micronaut, lots of talks from groovy people who will also be at GreatConf Europe.
Hmm.
So we'll see some of the same people again there. Uh, and yeah, I think that's um, all I really wanted to mention.
Now that was in Germany, wasn't it? Where was that again?
Correct. The conference itself is at this amusement park outside of Cologne,
Oh, really?
and it's a very interesting venue to have a conference. I was not a fan,
Ah.
but I can understand how some people might like it.
So I suppose if it was in Germany, I should call it Java Land rather than Java Land, right? I mean, I suppose
Uh,
outside Cologne or whatever. Okay, well, wonderful. I mean, glad you were there. Um, you also put in the link. I remember that what is it, Redbubble now that is offering some groovy swag.
yeah, it got promoted by Apache again, so I went back and looked at it. There's some T-shirts, and you can even get like a little pillow for your house.
And a laptop skin and all that stuff and uh like cool, I totally forgot this stuff existed, that you could get it. I have a bunch of old t-shirts, but I'm gonna have, of course, if I bring another mug into the house, my wife is gonna, so I have to be choosy on these things, be selective there.
I
Okay.
have quite a few.
What else do we have here? Vladimir Oranje, again, however you pronounce his name. Vladimir, if you're out there, please feel free to correct me on that. So I can. I mean, I'll probably forget, but correct me multiple times. I'm okay with that. At any rate, he was kind enough to publish his workshop notes. Looks like they were written in ASCII doc, by the way. Workshop notes for his Groovy DSL workshop that he did at Greach. So that's the first thing I've seen published out of Greach like that. The DSL workshop, of course, it's something I've always been meaning to dig into a lot more deeply. How to build a DSL. I know the basics. I haven't done a lot of it because it's easy to make a bad DSL. But this looks to be very helpful, and I put the link in the notes so that if you're interested at all in how you build a Groovy DSL, there's an excellent set of notes there by, and his Twitter handle is Musketeer with a Y. How about that? I think I follow him actually, so I think I saw the link when it first came up as well. Let's see. There's an interesting link that I saw. I think tweeted once, and then also Sergio had it in a Groovy Calamari issue, was about Groovy regular expressions, the definitive guide. Which now the definitive guide, of course, really is the stuff at groovy.org. I mean the actual docs on the homepage. But this was a nice little guide with the syntax. But he also, the thing that was unusual about this is the person who put it together, and I don't have the person's name handy. I'm pretty sure it was a him though. Also did some performance measures. Actually, the reason I don't see the name is the name's not highlighted on the actual blog post. I mean, I just found it again. But after showing the patterns and replacements and everything, he's got. So maybe I shouldn't say he. I don't know. But the person who wrote it has multiple performance measurements using JMH, the Java Micro Benchmarking Harness, and he's running it from Gradle, which again, there's Cedric again, because Cedric he's the person behind the JMH plugin for Gradle. you know so this is those are the sorts of results that you can believe, because it's actually using real warm-up iterations and averaging and all kinds of things. And he's got a nice little the blog post lists many different measures of performance throughout the. Oh, there's the name. It's yeah, right, it's Simon. Stepniak, and of course we knew that. So I think we may have mentioned this earlier, but I didn't really dig into it until now. So, any rate, thank you very much for that, and the blog post is listed in the show notes as well. A couple of real quick ones, by the way. I don't know if you follow that blog by, what is it, Baeldung? Building. Yeah, that group, I don't think that's one person. I think that's a group of people. They tend to blog about Spring related things, but other Java generic stuff. And they're in the flavor of, if you don't know about them, they're in the flavor of the sort of stuff that Mr. Hockey does, and that they're relatively brief posts to go through. Mr. Hockey's more dedicated to a specific task, how do you do exactly this, and therefore he's got tons of them. These are more, okay, how do you do, and the ones that I've listed here, there was a guide to I/O in Groovy, and there was an introduction to traits in Groovy. So it's nice to see that group bringing the beginner stuff, the groovy stuff to the general public as well. It reminds people we're still around, because sometimes you run into people going, really, is groovy still a thing? Yeah, it's a thing.
Yeah, more popular than ever.
Absolutely. I mean, depending on how you measure popularity. And speaking of that, once more somebody decided to write a blog post based on the Tiobe index, which we highlighted earlier the last time you were on the podcast, as you reminded me, right?
I still like mine better.
Oh yeah, well I agree with that too. But this one I thought was interesting because it was actually from a jobs type site. Dice, which is a job searching
Oh,
type site. Yeah, they wrote a little article on their blog called "Groovy Enjoying the Grooviest Rise Among Programming Languages." I go to great lengths not to make that pun. You know, it's just fish in a barrel. But at any rate, it was based on the February update of the Tiobe index where Groovy jumped from 49th to 19th. I don't remember it dropping to 49th, but when you're measuring, it's such a, you're measuring a very weak signal, and depending on how many people happen to vote that month or whatever they're measuring based on, you know.
yeah.
Uh, but it's always good to see somebody going, somebody outside of the normal players saying, oh, by the way, hey, this is still an interesting thing to do. The only other thing I added in here was Graham Roche gave 3 talks at DevNexus, and he has already shared his presentation slides. So I put a link to the tweet itself and then the link to the 3 slides. All 3 were related to Micronaut. One called the Micronaut Deep Dive, one on their AOT capability, the ahead of time compilation mechanisms, and Micronaut and Grails as well. And I think that's everything in the show notes that I had. The next section's the part called what Jenn's been up to.
Oh, right, I did add that section.
So you may want to handle that part.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I am the only one qualified to answer that. So, yeah. So I guess that like having me here means that I can talk a little bit about the things that I've been doing and maybe haven't been talking about. So, I have been working as a developer advocate for Gradle, which unfortunately means spending a little bit less time on Groovy things and more out in other ecosystems, which is also an opportunity because it means that I get to try and use Groovy in my demos in other ecosystems and other communities. So that's both an opportunity and it does mean I have to write some comments sometimes. Uh,
Did you win the over under? What was the over under this time?
I don't know, but I'm actually surprised because I think this might be the longest we've managed to go.
I was kind of
Uh,
going out of my way not to bring it up. So, but at any rate, go
oh,
ahead.
sorry, I broke it. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, so I'm saying this because we're doing a lot of smaller events, so I'm not going to as many of the same developer conferences as I was. Gradle is now doing more of these little tiny events. So the 2 that I have coming up are Cloud Beast Days in New York City and in Atlanta, and those will be the week after Easter, which is like the 23rd and 25th of April.
Hmm.
And then we'll probably start doing more of those, so keep an eye out. Grail may be coming to a city near you in the US and Europe. Yeah, and then I have a couple more events. So I'm going to talk about dependency management, which I've been talking about the last time I was here and this time at Spring I/O in Barcelona. So I actually co-submitted with Andy Wilkinson, who is who I've talked about before because he's also the project lead on Spring Restox, which is the project that I've talked about before. But he also does all the Gradle dependency management plugin stuff at Spring for within the Spring Boot team. And so we're going to do a comparison of Gradle's new native bomb support to the Spring Boot dependency management plugin, and kind of when you want to use both, or when you want to use either of those. So that should be exciting and hopefully helpful for everyone that is confused as to why both still exist.
And then you'll definitely be at Great Conf, of course.
I will most certainly be at Great Conf. I already have the days off,
Yeah,
so I probably should buy my plane ticket.
rumor has it you're on the committee, right?
Yeah, yeah. I help organize. I help do tweets. I'm doing this diversity ticket initiative that we talked about. And if you ping me, you can even get a discount code. But oh yeah, and I guess I do have one. We waited long enough, so if you waited to this point in the show, you can have our listeners only discount code.
Ooh.
Which will give you 35% off of the regular price for KitCon. So if you were to sign up today, you get the early bird, which is 25%, but this code is 35%. And so it's great. So GR and then the number 8, GPOD 19. So great Groovy Podcast 19.
Seriously, you actually leverage the Groovy Podcast for a I'm thrilled. I can't believe we actually are involved. So
we have our own discount code.
Yeah, say it again. So
I can contribute.
yeah, so GR8 and then G Pod, really? Groovy Podcast 19.
Yeah.
For the year?
With it, yeah. The contingency here is that you have to listen to the podcast. So we aren't going to put it in the show notes. And please don't. If you publish it on Twitter, I'm going to have to deactivate it, unfortunately, because we don't want it to be something that anyone could just like search and get 35% off.
Wow. Okay. Well, I mean, we'll see if anybody makes it to this point in that it's a really unusual measure of whether anybody's listening or not. But okay, maybe Sergio will listen. I don't know. So at any rate, that'll be that. You'll have to let us know if anybody winds up using the discount code, because we'll know where they got it. I suppose, by the way, if you're going to mention Kotlin, okay, then I do feel obligated to mention that the first early release version of my Kotlin cookbook is now out. That's through Safari. I mean, I know it's not supposed to be called Safari anymore. It's the O'Reilly Learning Platform. But if you go to do you believe that? I know. Well, that's a whole nother argument. We're getting to the end here. But I will tell you that if you go to the web page for my Kotlin cookbook, I suppose I should probably put a link in the show notes. It says read on Safari. So it still says Safari on it. So at any rate, I'm going to call it that. But anyway, we've just got 3 chapters out. And of course, it's all recipes that'll be jumping around all over the place. So there's lots more coming. There's way more than that is finished at this point. So that's good. And I'm just steadily adding to it. I should also mention that I talk about this and other things in my own newsletter. Again, if you only could do one newsletter, do the Gradle one. But my own is at tinyletter.com/KOUSENIT. So, at any rate, the Kousen IT newsletter. See, it's a company newsletter with a one-person company. So, I also think it's a midlife crisis thing, right? As I have a newsletter now. So, but at any rate, just. Well, yeah, but that wasn't my fault, Okay, so I think that's everything. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up? I'm just scanning through.
I think we've talked on for a while.
Yeah.
Anything else we forgot, we can do in the next one.
And again, we'll post a link to the show notes as well. And thank you very much for listening, and thank you to No Fluff Just Stuff for hosting a Groovy Podcast homepage. Also, Hans Doctor and Andre Salmire did some Gradle talks at No Fluff events in Minneapolis and in Boston as well.
Right.
Yeah, I missed them. They were there before the conference. I was there during the conference. We missed each other, which was kind of annoying actually, but what are you going to do? Hopefully they'll do more of those as well. And thank you so much for being available. You put a link to your homepage at the bottom, which is excellent. The JennStrater.com. So
you accepted that.
Are you?
I kind of threw that in to see if I could
if you hadn't put in there, I was actually all planning to say, "Oh, please put in your link as well." And it's like you took care of it, so it's like excellent. I'm glad to see that. So, oh yeah, you're definitely friend of the family. You're always welcome here. And if Baruch is unavailable, well, so much the better, right? No, I'm kidding. So, at any rate, it's really great to have you here. Thank you very much for coming, and we'll see everybody whenever we do our next podcast, which will definitely be before GreatCom. So, okay, so take care, everybody. Thank you very much.